Welcome. You are watching episode 28 of the Mobility Talks, the web series by EIT Urban Mobility on all things mobility. In this episode, we are going to discuss developments in autonomous vehicles. Does 2025 represent a crucial year for the development and deployment of this technology? It certainly sounds like the race is on. Earlier this year, we heard that Waymo announced its plans to expand testing of its autonomous driving technology in over 10 new cities in 2025. At the same time, Tesla announced it will be rolling out commercial robotaxis by June in Austin, Texas. And CATL and Baidu in China signed a collaboration agreement in the areas of unmanned driving, digitalization, and intelligence to promote the development of driverless mobility services. Part of the issue is the technology package that enables autonomy: sensors, maps, data, AI systems, cameras, machine learning. The other aspect is to develop a viable business model. So far, the development of robotaxis seems to be the main obsession behind these investments, at least in the United States and China. But is the value proposition of autonomous vehicles only about removing the driver? Or are there other deeper transformations that can make a valuable contribution to the way we plan mobility in our cities? Can autonomous vehicles make an impact on reducing congestion, increasing shared mobility, improving public transport, making logistics and deliveries more efficient, or reducing emissions? To some extent, there is already a lot of autonomy embedded in vehicles. Look at assisted driving, partial autonomy, or conditional autonomy. Think also of whatever goes on tracks without the risk of bumping into anything else, metro lines or shuttles, for instance. But how far can and should vehicles become autonomous? These questions are important because there are concerns on the development of autonomous mobility. EIT Urban Mobility launched a poll on LinkedIn to see what the community felt was the biggest hurdle for the adoption of this technology, and the number one answer was safety concerns and technology readiness, which we could assume is also linked to guaranteeing safety. We will be digging into these issues with our esteemed panel of experts today, and I am pleased to introduce Karl Obermair, Chairperson at PAVE Europe, a cross-sectoral industry consortium of key players in the field of highly automated and autonomous mobility. Karl is also director of the Future Mobility of TÜV Rhineland, which is responsible for developing new global mobility services. John McSweeney is project coordinator at UITP, the International Association of Public Transport Authorities. He was involved with the SHOW project, a Horizon 2020 project, which aims to support the deployment of shared, connected, and electrified automation in urban transport. And Olav, Madland, CEO of Applied Autonomy, a company helping operators, public transport agencies, and cities getting their connected autonomous vehicle programs up and running, whether it's for moving people or goods. So welcome to the three of you. Unfortunately, Lili Kuusk, the CEO of ITS Estonia, could not join us today as she is unwell. She lost her voice, so that obviously made it very difficult to have her with her, but we wish her a speedy recovery. I would also like to introduce you to yourselves. You were close to 200 to register for this episode, which shows a lot of interest for the topic, especially as we see participants coming from 36 different countries. So I see that this is definitely a topic of global relevance. We also see a strong interest from private sector representatives and an equal interest from public sector organizations, as well as academia and research. I am counting on all of you to make this conversation relevant by asking questions, raising comments, and engaging with our speakers. To do that, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions. I will be monitoring both. And to get us started, I have asked our panelists to prepare a short presentation answering the question, do you expect big changes in 2025 towards more autonomous vehicles on the road? And in fact, we are now asking you the same question so we can compare results at the end of the presentations. Please let us know your answer in the poll. Okay, so without further ado, let's hear first from Karl Obermair. Karl, what are your expectations then for autonomous mobility in 2025?
Yes, thank you very much, Jean-Paul. It's a big honor to be here with you. Let me introduce a little bit of myself and my background. I am the chairman of PAVE Europe. The acronym PAVE stands for Partners in Automated Vehicle Education. So this is an organization which doesn't lobby for a certain type of technology or a certain type of solution. We are lobbying for automation in mobility in general. So we see us as the voice for automation, representing important parts. Members in this organization are, for example, Waymo or Mobileye, but also from other industries like the insurance industries, Allianz or Swiss Re, or from the automobile industry, Moya from Volkswagen Group. So it's a very cross-sectoral organization which deals with all aspects of automated mobility. Why is it necessary to have such a European organization? It's necessary because, in our opinion, it's quite different. There are quite different concepts in place when we're talking about automated mobility. If we look to the United States or to China, so there is a specific European perception and a European way towards automation, which is important to understand. Why in general is it necessary to have an organization which understands as a kind of voice for automation? Yes, we see in many studies and in many discussions that the concept of automated mobility is very difficult for the people to understand. So it's an innovation. There are either fears or futuristic hopes which are not realistic, but it's very seldom that the people have a clear and quite rational attitude towards automation. But the same is also true if we look to politicians or decision makers. There is a lack of understanding of automated mobility, and this is quite a crucial problem. In my opinion, especially the representatives of the automotive industries, the car makers, really have difficulties understanding the disruptive nature of automated mobility and autonomous driving. Let me start with a very fundamental point. It starts with the wording already, because autonomous driving is something like a contradiction in itself. Autonomous driving really means being driven. So in a way, automated mobility and autonomous driving, you can also understand as being the end or the beginning of the automobile. If you look to the term automobile, it's already the vision in it that this thing is moved by itself or by a system, not by a driver. So in a way, when we look at automated mobility, we see the end of the classical mobile, and we see the beginning of a new concept of mobility. So this is really a disruptive technology and a disruptive solution, not only for the cars, but for the whole mobility ecosystem, also regarding public transport or goods delivery solutions in smart cities. Is 2025 such a crucial year? We see right now that there is an ongoing discussion about the question of regulation or deregulation of this technology. If we look to the United States, they are definitely the technology leaders in the field of automated mobility. And their concept is really a deregulated concept, which differs very much and widely from the European point of view. And as we have seen during the last weeks, this path of deregulation is even speeding up in the United States. So we are expecting that the technology, especially when we're talking about artificial intelligence, that these drivers of technology will develop much more dynamics than we have seen in the past. And this also affects other parts of the world. We see a kind of yes, let's call it fight between different approaches of automated mobility, with China on the one side, the United States and Europe on the other side. So this is a crucial phase, because we see already that first more or less successful business models are established in the United States. Whereas we see in Europe or in China, we are lagging behind that development for some years. So to sum it up a little bit is we think that not only the car drivers, the population has difficulties in understanding automated mobility, but also decision makers, policymakers, because they do not really see or understand the disruptive nature of that technology. Automated mobility offers huge benefits for society. If we think about an aging society, if we think about disabled people, if we think about the inclusion potentials of automated mobility, if we think, for example, on the labor market, that we have really difficulties in finding truck drivers, in finding bus drivers, all these problems with regard to public transport, in financing public transport, organizing public transport, all this could be interesting use cases for automated mobility. 2025 will be something like the decisive year in a way, because we see many pilot applications all over the world, also in Europe. But these pilot applications are not enough. So what we are expecting right now is that we really see the implementation of real life solutions in domains of public transport systems, but also in the domains of good delivery. And so this will show, so there will be the proof of these concepts. And this will really be a big challenge for all the players in the ecosystem. So it is a fascinating technology. It is a disruption ahead of us. We see a decisive year. The policies are really conflicting. So there might be some decisions, who will make it, who will not make it. And there are even some critical voices that say Europe will not play a leading role in that battle because the United States and China are so strong players that it will be difficult for European consortium to play a significant role. I'm a little bit more optimistic about this, but in 2025 we will see if we can make it, yes or no.
Okay, brilliant, Karl. Yeah, I mean, you're actually echoing also a comment in the chat, because as you mentioned, yes, it's a decisive year, and obviously you're certainly optimistic that it should be a decisive year, but you're already mentioning that the pace is very different in different parts of the world, and what decisive means is also very different because the technology has developed in very different ways. So you're more optimistic on the European side, but still the reality is that Europe needs to play catch up. Do you think it's realistic that Europe will catch up, or do you think it's more probable that Europe will develop some kind of very different path to the way autonomous vehicles will be developed in US and China?
I want to quote Frank Sinatra here. If you can make it there, you make it anywhere. That's a little bit the wording of international global players when they look to the European markets. So at the moment, Europe is so specific, especially in terms of regulation, that the big global players from China, but also from US say, listen, this market is so important for us that we have to make it in Europe also. And so the word, if you make it in Europe, if you make it there, you make it everywhere. So they say, listen, this is the toughest market for automated mobility. And if we succeed on that market, this is for Europe, it's a chance and a challenge at the same time. It's a chance because all the big players really try to perform on the European markets. and they will challenge all European industry initiatives to the utmost. So yes, I am optimistic, but it definitely needs a concentration of efforts that we can handle this challenge. It's not an easy task. It needs huge investments. It needs a lot of time to follow up that investments. So these are the challenges that we will see in the next years and in this year especially.
Okay, brilliant, Karl. Thank you so much, and we'll be discussing a lot more in the panel straight after. Stay with us. So next up then is John McSweeney. John, what are your expectations for 2025?
Thanks very much, John Paul. Thanks for the invitation to be here. So just to get started, maybe just for those people who don't know us, just a quick word about UITP and who we are and what I'm doing at UITP. So UITP is the International Association for Public Transport. We're the only worldwide network to bring together all public transport stakeholders and all sustainable transport modes. We have about 1,900 members across 100 countries. And through advocacy and knowledge development and networking, we're looking to enhance quality of life and economic well-being by supporting, promoting sustainable transport in urban areas worldwide. I'm a project coordinator for UITP, working specifically on the topic of automated mobility. And on that topic, we have kind of three primary areas of work. The first is a working group of our members, which is transversal and brings together public transport operators and authorities, OEMs, industries, service providers, really the whole range of the ecosystem. They're working on an updated policy brief on automated mobility, which is due out later in the year, so keep an eye out for that. As you mentioned earlier, we're also involved in a number of EU projects supporting automated mobility and linking learnings from those to our members. And we're also involved in kind of representing public transport more broadly in the CCAM ecosystem through the CCAM partnership in Europe, through PAVE Europe with Karl's group, and also leveraging our international membership to promote more collaboration in the sector. So to come to your question specifically about 2025, I'll build a little bit on what Karl said, I think. And my answer is yes, 2025 is going to be a big year, but we're not going to know for a while. So I would hope that maybe in 5-10 years, we can look back at 2025 as a year where really the CCAM ecosystem became much more mature and really started to develop. We are probably not going to see any kind of bolts of lightning that are going to fundamentally change the sector just in this year. But I think we're seeing a lot of smaller, more positive changes that kind of together are going to add up to produce something much more promising in the years ahead. Some of these have already been mentioned by Karl, but what I think we're seeing at the moment is much more advanced technology coming to the market. Now, of course, we've had pilots and demo operations running in the sector for a decade, but it feels like in the last couple of years and accelerating this year, we've seen much more advanced technology that's delivering better ADS systems, larger vehicles, more robust services getting on the road. A lot of this as well comes from the international collaboration and the consolidation that we're starting to see in the market. And Karl mentioned, that maybe the US and China are ahead in Europe, but we're starting to see now operators who are deploying simultaneously in those kinds of markets. And we're seeing more and more technology, especially coming into Europe. And I think this is a good step forward, and it's something that's going to push the industry in Europe forward even more. And all of this means that there are more vehicles operating in more places. And this is still really crucial because whatever advancements have been made, a lot more testing needs to be done. And that's really about kilometers driven. We need more vehicles on the road in more places, driving more kilometers. That's still what's going to push the technology forward even more. And then we're talking about what all of that testing and development is producing. And we're starting to see the kinds of business cases and the use cases for the technology become more established, and where operators are leading the way in doing this, they're already starting to see the kind of internal operational learnings that are going to need in terms of the new kind of job roles that this requires, job descriptions, depot organization, how you manage the entire ecosystem of delivering an automated mobility service. And we're starting to see the next steps become clear, particularly in Europe. I think that means developing remote operation. So it's not to suggest that all of these questions are being solved or are going to be solved in a year or two, but I think we're narrowing down the range of questions that we have. We're seeing a clearer path forward. I am still relatively new to the CCAM sector. I know we've kind of had some false dawns in the past, that maybe back in 2025, we were expecting that by 2020, all of these questions would already have been solved. But really, I think we're at a slightly more mature level now, and I'm quite hopeful that especially in Europe, that the new deployments and the new projects that we're going to see coming out in the next couple of years can really build on this by validating the most promising business models and use cases, making use of a new generation of technology, and really helping to propel things forward. I'm going to, of course, introduce a little but into this. As I said, we've been here before with some false dawns in technology. We need to keep delivering, keep developing, keep testing. And we also need to be aware that, in an era maybe of more trade wars, more international uncertainty, we need to be conscious of where the technology is coming from and whether the technology is still going to be there tomorrow. There are some very high-level strategic decisions, particularly in Europe, that will need to be made about the technology that's being deployed and about and what you said, Jean-Paul, about whether Europe wants to catch up technology-wise, whether it wants to leverage technology from elsewhere, what kind of expectations we want to set. As Karl already alluded to, particularly in Europe, the regulatory framework is not there to support this technology yet. From the SHOW project, we really saw that Europe is lagging behind in the basic permitting and frameworks to get these vehicles on the road, to test them and to continue to improve. We're not going to be able to build on the success we've had to date unless we get that sorted out. And also, to kind of close my point here, what we need to be aware of now is that as the technology is maturing, we need to start designing the right services now so that when we do look back in 5-10 years, we feel that we've made the right decisions. And that means services that are accessible, that are inclusive by design. Obviously, from our side at UITP, we think that the best use of automated technology is either fully integrated or at least complementary to public transport, and that we use the technology to boost the benefits that public transport already brings in terms of, as you mentioned, Jean-Paul, in your intro, in terms of reducing congestion, in terms of promoting accessibility, economic development, and basically better urban environments. So that's it in a nutshell for me. I think I'm quite positive about where we're going. I don't think we should be complacent. There's still some work to be done. But I do think in 5-10 years, we can look back at 2025 maybe as the kind of starting point for a newer, more mature area for technology. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, John. And maybe to bounce back on this point that you made on, technology coming into Europe, right? And at the same time, you're saying, but this is in the context of, many sort of trade wars and geopolitical tension and weaponization of various tools.
Yes.
And there's a question coming from the audience to say, has Europe paid enough attention on its competitiveness agenda to supporting the kind of homegrown European solutions and companies in the area of autonomous vehicles? And maybe specifically to link it back to your area, public authorities, public transport authorities, and their procurement power to develop this kind of technology. Do you see a big difference in the procurement power being directed towards autonomous vehicles in other parts of the world compared to Europe? And do you think that's something that could help somehow support the European solutions?
In a fundamental way, yes, there's a massive difference in the kind of money that has been spent and the time that has been spent on this technology in different jurisdictions. I mean, the sums of money being pumped into solutions like Waymo far outstrip what has been deployed in Europe. And that's, at a certain point, that kind of money talks, again, because it simply enables them to put vehicles on the road running for longer. I mean, they've had, I think, vehicles in public traffic in California since 2012, I think, or at least maybe 2015. So it's a bit difficult then to come into this 10 years later and play catch up. The other important thing to note as well is that, of course, public transport operators and authorities have lots of competing interests as well. I mean, there's a big push in the sector to decarbonize, so through either electrification or through hydrogen and hybrid fleets. So automation is one element that the sector is grappling with, but it's not going to be, at least in the intermediate term, it's not going to be the big thing. What I think we have in Europe is a lot of experience, particularly in the digital and tech sector, of leveraging technology from elsewhere. And we've seen it, with the Digital Services Act and how we regulate platforms economies, that we can come to an understanding of how we can use technology and services developed elsewhere in a way that we in Europe are comfortable with and that fits European regulation, European values. Now, some of that, of course, has been questioned again. We've gone back and forth on some of this before, so I would say at least what we need to do is have this debate now and decide now if we really do want to promote a European industrial response to this, or if we're going to be comfortable with regulating technology from outside of Europe and leveraging that. But let's have that debate now, and that is going to be sorted out at the highest levels of the European Union. Let's have the debate now and not in 5 years' time when these vehicles are on the road.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because that debate, as you pose it, is actually an extremely horizontal debate that goes way beyond simply mobility and touches almost every aspect of a citizen's life these days. So it's a very challenging question as you pose it. Thanks, John. We'll be getting into more of that in the panel, so stay with us, and we will now call up our third speaker, Olav. So now it's up to you to tell us what your opinion is on 2025 as a CEO in the business of autonomy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. I will take a more practical introduction into this topic by showing a case from Norway that has been developing over some years. That is a case from Stavanger. It's a large bus, as you can see here from an inside camera. It's an 8-meter long bus from Karl, that is the bus manufacturer, automated by Adastec. Adastec is a US-based company that have their R&D department in Turkey. Karl is a Turkish bus manufacturer. Applied Autonomy, we provide the fleet management and supervision system that is agnostic, neutral to a vehicle type. I will show a little bit of that. And we have also taken the role of safety management on behalf of Vybus, that is the operator, and Columbus is the public transport agency that have funded the project. So what we have done in Stavanger is we have implemented this large bus in a stepwise approach that I will show you afterwards. We have a reference group where we have members from the Stavanger city and Rogaland County and the police. And all the implementation is based on the Norwegian law supporting piloting of autonomous vehicles under development and supporting the actors to achieve. And we are supporting the actors to achieve this EU 2022-1426 type approval. So what we do in Stavanger is making a method to implement these things that is now copied by several cities: Rotterdam, Arbon, Gothenburg, Zeeland, Mountains, Madrid, Vienna, and we're welcoming other cities to copy us, to use the same method, so this can be scalable based on something that is rolling on the roads today. So applied autonomy, very shortly, what do? We we developed the cloud system where vehicles that are automated can be connected. And we started in 2017 with easy mile vehicles that you saw on the invitation today. And we have connected then more and more vehicles, both within logistics and within mobility. Our sweet spot is mobility, and I'll come back more to that. And we were ranked this last year as the #1 in autonomous solutions by a business magazine. So what have we done in the stepwise approach? These slides will be shared with you afterwards, so there are some links here that you can look at and see more videos. But we started with a bus from Kherson that we didn't know from before in April 2022. We used the vehicle on confined area with gravels, with water pods that we knew that were challenging for these other vehicles that we have tried before to drive on. And we did different type of safety tests to see that this vehicle were appropriate to use in open streets, and we wrote a report to the National Public Road Authorities documenting what our findings were. And the findings that we had in this first phase was very promising. So the bus was deployed in a mixed traffic route in Stavanger, from the harbor out to a concert hall to another area where more people were living. So it was not a long route; it was 4 kilometers long, and it was in with bicycle, e-scooters, tourists coming in and out from a large cruise vessel. So it was quite challenging route to drive, and we were driving on this route 99% in autonomous mode with a safety driver on board, and also an engineer from Arastek taking place there that improved the vehicle's behavior and functionality in that route. So when we achieved that goal, 99%, Columbus decided that they wanted to make another route to improve the technology and support improving the technology further. That is route number 19. There we had, as you can see on the top here, was 4 kilometers long in total, with tunnels, line shift, right and left, traffic lights, and very narrow streets. In addition, 50 kilometers an hour as maximum speed. The vehicle could achieve up to 40 based on safety tests. And that route is still in operation. We are now achieved so high level of autonomous driving. Now the engineer from Arastek is removed, and I will show more details into this. We are now in phase 3.5, where the safety driver is still behind the wheel, but doing nothing without looking at the traffic and seeing that the bus is safe. We are now preparing to take the next step to move the safety driver from the wheel to a passenger seat. And the next step, and the next step is stage 5, phase 5. We will remove the safety driver totally and drive the vehicle by itself. So, and that means that other actors, they can start on the phase 3.5, because what we had Arastek have shown now is that this vehicle it's mature to drive on this, and Gothenburg will copy it, and Rotterdam will copy it, and other cities will copy it. Then if we go further on, here this slide shows the roles. So here, as you can see, there is the vehicle will handle the driver. We will have an on-site person supporting the vehicles and passengers if needed. We will have a remote support and an operation manager. So these are the roles that we will have in this operation from the autumn. And now from May this year, we will have, or late April, we will have the safety driver on the left side. In the UK, would be on the right side, of course. But this is the method. And we are using an ISO draft on the roles and responsibilities. So there has been no incidents, no accidents, and we are using risk assessment on preparing all this, and we are updating the risk assessment during the process. So here you can see the routes. We have a video that we can show in the end. This is the road situations that we are driving in. And you are welcoming to come and see it. On the right side, you see Gothenburg. Here we will also have trams that we need to yield to. So it's and the risk assessment shows that it's safe, of course. So this is how the fleet management system works. It's integrated with Arastek's FlowRide AI platform, and it's that is again integrated with Karl bus. And the fleet management system is also provided and prepared for other vehicles. And the remote operator have the same functionality as the driver have, except of driving, except of using the wheel. But the doors can be opened and closed, the lights can be turned off and on, and the temperature can be changed, and they can do everything from there, from the remote control center. We have also tested and prepared for AI supported passenger support. So passengers here in the case here has fallen on the floor or on the seat, and the AI solution automatically called up the remote control center. And there is also a push button in the bus that can activate a call to the remote control center. So that was it. Then we can show the video if we have some minutes left. I guess that is something you have to do remote. Here we can see it. The bus, there are LiDARs, cameras on the top. There are LiDARs on each corner. They recognize passengers. There is additional arc and redundant anti-collision system. So if a person jump into the street, the bus will stop automatically. The autonomous driving solution recognize all objects in advance and have predictions, as you can see on the screen there, on where other actors will be, and adjust the driving based on their behalf or their planned route. So there are here, as you can see, pedestrian crossing, and we also have in this road here, this vehicle is the only one that I would say follow the traffic rules. All the other actors, they do as humans do. They sometimes do not follow the traffic rules. So that is also taken into the account in our safety management and risk assessment, and the way the vehicle take it into account when it's driving. So this is something that you can come and visit and learn much from when you are in Stavanger. That is in west coast of Norway, South Norway. So it's nice now from the spring and yeah. So you're all welcome. This is scalable.
Yeah, it's not far from the Norwegian Riviera, so it's a nice place to go and visit anyway. Brilliant, thanks Olav. One question which I think is relevant for you directly before we jump into the panel. It's this question of replicability, right? So going from Stavanger to other cities, for instance, let's say Rotterdam or others. There's also a comment to ask, where are the German cities? Are German cities not interested? But let's say you would apply this to Rotterdam. I mean, is it simply a sort of a copy-paste type thing, or would you need to do a lot of re-engineering, reworking, retesting? I mean, is it basically developing the solution again, city by city, or is it quite replicable?
So the solution and the setup is very possible to copy. The biggest barrier just now is the regulations that for using these type of vehicles. Many of the European countries signed the Amsterdam Declaration in 2016, making it possible to use these vehicles that is not type approved. But we see that the different European countries, they have not made it equally, and And it's some few countries that say that a vehicle that is approved for another country can also automatically or very easily be approved in another European country. Spain is an example of that. Latvia is another example. But we see in other countries that they like to do the same testing again, and we ask why. When Norway have approved this, when Sweden have approved this, why not work more together and share the approvals?
Yeah, I mean, this is always going to be the question of trust, right? And how much trust goes cross-border to some extent. But yes, thank you, Olav, for raising that. And I propose we jump straight into the panel because there's a lot of interest already. I mean, I'm getting lots of comments in the chat and questions. And the result to our poll, which was basically, do you think 2025 is going to be a big year for autonomous vehicles or not, was pretty much 50-50, right? It was about 52%, 48%. So we see that, there are quite split views on this and a lot of interest. And so I would like to get this started with a more general view on what you see actually as being the end game when we talk about more autonomy, more autonomous vehicles. What are we actually talking about? Are we talking about getting more vehicles in terms of the number of vehicles on the road, or are we talking about an extreme shift in the way these vehicles are moving? So the type of autonomy we're talking about in the vehicles. Karl, what do you think is the end game here? The numbers of vehicles or the actual qualitative shift, the technology itself?
That's a super question, Jean-Paul. Let me answer that with regard to different views. Car manufacturers, OEMs, they look at the technology from a perspective of improving the car. Yeah. So they see autonomy like a feature of a car. Like in former times, a massage seat was a feature of a car and the reason why this car should be bought by someone. So they have the view of the car, and their perspective is to sell as many cars as possible. That's their DNA. That's, in my opinion, the old view on the things. The new view on the things is that you understand automated mobility as a holistic smart city solution where all these former criteria like public or private transport, individual or mass transport are mixing up or losing their contradictory. So in my opinion, it's the end game is about reducing the number of vehicles significantly in a city. And I want to give you one example. There was a study of 2 weeks of taxi driving in Manhattan. So 2 weeks were completely covered by a professor of mathematics, statistics, who covered each individual ride in a taxi in Manhattan for 2 weeks. And in a kind of simulation, he asked himself the question, how many vehicles would I have needed if these taxi rides would have been optimized by artificial intelligence and on-demand solutions? And they realized that with 20% of the vehicles, they could cover 100% of the rides. So you see, there's a huge, even if it's not that much, but there's a huge potential for reducing the number of vehicles by simply delivering on-demand automated mobility solutions for a smart city. So that is the end game, and that's the reason why. And we also are talking about not owning a car, but using a car and mobility as a service. That's the end game. And many, many people in the old car industry haven't understood this or have the DNA against it because they simply want to say, the higher the number of vehicles that I can put to the market, the more successful I am. That's the old paradigm.
So talking of paradigms, there's also a question which I think is relevant here, and maybe Olav can comment on it to continue this more sort of futuristic view of autonomy. Do you foresee a point where people would own their own autonomous vehicle or rent it out potentially? Or do you think autonomous vehicles would be more focused on robo-taxis and public transport specifically?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. I will answer that. But first, I have to say that if some road authorities, they like to invest money, and I've got questions. How much do we need to invest? And I said you need to invest in a scissor, because the thing that we have done in Stavanger is just cut some branches, not more. So, but then answering a question, I think the business model is quite challenging here. I think we will see different types of business models on this. Some actors might buy a fully automated vehicle and like to use it and like to have it into a fleet, like with what we see with some Uber vehicles today. They are into the fleet of Ubers and sometimes and after and then they are out of it. But the challenge here is responsibility, because there are some roles and responsibilities around this. And when you are using the car, you need to know these insurance things and all these things, and that makes it challenging for a private person to hire out their car, because who has the insurance when it's not on my responsibility as a private person, but it's on a fleet. So I think that will take some time to have established. I think the more model we will see first is operators using these vehicles based on tenders. And my recommendation then for tenders is not just to look at lower cost, but also look at how should the service be for the end user, like universal design, that the ramp should go up by itself, that there should be some type of services for the passengers when there is not a driver on board. And I think if the PTAs, those that have tenders, just are looking on prices, will not see these vehicles in the roads, and we will still have the challenge to get drivers because they will use the same method future. So I recommendation here to UITP to help the PTAs to create procurement methods to get this into the market, going from now R&D project to start to scaling, because what they buy tomorrow will be the vehicles they buy tomorrow will be used in 8 years, and then these actors miss the transformation.
Yeah. And John, also maybe a comment on this, because obviously for public transport, you'd imagine that the fact that you would have these fixed routes means that an end game could be to fully automize the vehicles on those routes, right? That could be quite an imaginable outcome in the end. Is that the case? Is that a kind of an end game in your view for public transport? And the other thing that I would like you to reflect on is a question from the chat as well on linking autonomous vehicles to the concept of the 15-minute city. And how much do you think autonomous vehicles could help to rethink cities and not just be a kind of a patch on a broken system where there's lots of spatial planning done around vehicles, right, on the roads? So maybe to try and comment on those two things, John.
Okay. Well, I'll take the slightly easier question first. In terms of what's the end point of automation, I think the important thing, at least from my point of view, is I'm not an engineer. Automation is a tool to achieve a certain aim, and the aim here is to move people. I think the kind of end point of automation, or the best point of automation to get to, is whatever level of automation you need to fix the problem or to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. So for some public transport operators, that may well be deploying full-sized 12-meter buses in BRT systems that are running every 1 minute headways that can carry thousands of people an hour. For other operators, it will be smaller vehicles, shuttles, doing on-demand first mile, last mile transfers in areas that were maybe underserved previously, peri-urban or even rural areas. And you'll have other public transport operators who, at least for the moment, they see automation just in the bus depot as already a big step forward in terms of efficiency and in terms of what it allows them to do elsewhere. So you can imagine a bus that is driven by a human driver on the road But at the end of the shift, the driver comes back to the depot, flicks a switch, and rather than spending 2 more hours going from driving the bus from maintenance to cleaning to parking, that's automated. And maybe in some areas, that's kind of a sufficient level of automation for now. So I think it's, rather than kind of imagining a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, it's really going to vary. And it's also going to be part of a wider mix. Like, we are still going to have metros, we're still going to have trams, we are still going to have, I hope, cycling and walking and active modes of transport. So I think it's hard to kind of paint this, future picture where it's going to look the same everywhere. Public transport already in my hometown of Cork in Ireland looks very different from public transport of where I live now in Brussels. It will still look different even with automation. So we need to see it as a part of the technology mix and a part of the solution to move people, and, as Karl said, to reduce car ownership and car usage in urban environments, and to kind of promote that. In terms of the 15-minute city, I'm not an urban planner, so this is maybe a bit beyond my wheelhouse. But the benefits of public transport are well established in terms of what it means for economic development, for accessibility, for inclusion, for cleaner air, for less congestion. Automation can help maximize that, can help push public transport into areas where it's not been possible until now, it's not been sustainable, and to spread those benefits further. I think let's at least start with that, and we can see if we want to reinvent entire cities a bit later on.
Yeah, it seems like a kind of game-changing technology, but it might not be quite so simple to say with autonomous vehicles we will be able to encourage, a full rethinking of urban planning. Probably other factors will need to come into that. We're talking about implementing this technology, but we also see these big gaps between certain parts of the world and what's happening in Europe. John, I'll bring you back on actually right now if you want. My question on the regulation side as well is how much one should support actively the rollout and the deployment of this type of technology. If we look at renewable energy, for instance, there are minimum quotas to reach of getting electricity from renewable energy sources. So there's a very active interventionist policy. Do you think we should have the same very positive approach when it comes to autonomous vehicles to set, let's say, minimum targets? Is that the way to go, or should we be more cautious about the rollout? John, I'll come back to you first, so you can comment as well on something else.
Yeah, sorry, what you were saying just at the end there reminded about cities adapting to automated vehicles, and it reminded me of the point that Olav mentioned about that all they did in Stavanger was to cut the trees back a little bit. I think it's a very important point. That I think it's a reasonable expectation that the automated vehicles will need to adapt to the cities as they are now, and that we not expect that there are massive infrastructure investments and massive changes to urban landscapes just to facilitate the technology. It needs to really work the other way around. Moving to your question about regulation, I don't think we need something like binding targets, again, because the technology needs to fit into, at least on the public transport side, what operators want, what the mix might be, types of vehicles that they will want to acquire and deploy, the kinds of services that they're going to want to use. It's going to vary massively. Both Olav and Karl have mentioned the challenge with regulation, and it's something that we saw with the Project Show that we ran, putting these vehicles on the road in 20 sites around Europe. We had a lot of difficulty just to get the permits to do the testing. We had some pilot sites in some countries that failed to get on the road despite 3 or 4 years of trying, purely on a permitting issue. So we need to get that fixed. I think beyond anything else, there are incredibly smart people, incredibly motivated people in this sector. Give them a stable, predictable testing framework that actually creates a European market, because for the moment we don't have a European market for Seeker. We have 27 different markets, and OEMs are having to comply with 27 sets of regulations to put their vehicles on the road. Let's at least have a harmonized testing framework, let people experiment and test, and that will already be a massive step forward.
Okay, understood. Thanks, John. Olav, you wanted to chip in.
I think it's a good question about this KPI. Should we set any targets? If you look at the cost savings of infrastructure and the cost saving of lives that humans, of course, I think it's a good question, because when we look at the simulation, then that we can, how many cars that we can reduce by implementing this service, and how much cost we could save, and how much more public transport we could deliver. I think it's interesting to set some KPIs, to set some targets, because this money could be transferred over to public transport, and all the cost savings that those that build residential houses could save in the non-parking lots. Those money can also be brought into this. So I think to set KPIs, and then to set what can the savings be, and how can we use the money on a different way. I think it's very interesting.
Okay, I'd like to hear also Karl on that one. You know, if you also believe that, let's say, minimum targets could be useful here.
I'm a little bit more on John's side, I have to say. So we see it with electric mobility right now in Europe. Yeah, we have political targets. We have a will to decarbonize our fleets. We have a will to switch to electric vehicles, and we set ourselves more or less political targets. But then something strange happens, you know. If the people get the feeling that they are forced to a certain type of technology, and at the same time they see that the technology is not really convincing, they start behaving exactly the other way than it was intended. So my answer would be, let the technology be that convincing and the service be that convincing that the people really are motivated to use that. If I think about all the time savings, about all the advantages that you might have when these systems are mature. So in my opinion, the technology should be self-convincing. But of course, it should work in the direction that we get to higher degrees. You know, when the first ADAS systems were implemented in the cars, the people simply were convinced about it. Yeah, that the parking assistance system helped me in a narrow garage to maneuver my car, and it saved me from bumping the car on a wall or something like that. So this is a really convincing feature. And this is the way in which these technologies should convince the people. So I think that it should be more on the pull side than on the push side of the story.
Yeah, so you're into this idea that we need to have framework conditions that allow for testing, proving that the technology can work, and allowing the technology to convince users that it can work. To
Yes.
stick with you, Karl, because there's a question also in the chat that I'd like to get your view on. In terms of that regulatory framework that more or less encourages these developments,
Yes.
what are the factors that slow things down in Europe? What kind of main concerns do you see in the regulation that mean that it's very difficult to carry out these pilots? What would you say are the biggest concerns?
So
yeah.
the typical European way is the concept of, let's say, a neutral third party. So a neutral third party has to look if such a solution is compliant, yes or no, before that solution is implemented on the market. And that's a different way than it's done, for example, in the United States. When you have a technology in the United States and you, as the owner of that technology, want to roll it out, and you cover the risk with a lot of money, you cover the risk, you are allowed to do so, or it is able for you to do so. It was possible in the last years, and it would be much, much easier in the years to come with the switch to complete deregulation. The European way is a completely different one. you first have to prove that the vehicle is from technology-wise mature. And only if that maturity is proved, then you are allowed to roll out the technology. That's the big difference. So you could take it another way. You could say in Europe, the technology has to be mature before it comes on the market. So the risk when it comes on the market is relatively low. In the United States, the venture capital driver behind such a technology covers the risk with its money, and the technology might not be that mature, but can be improved. So this is a quicker way on the one side, but it's a more risky way on the other side. And so that's always the balance between being quicker or being more on the risky side. And I think the European way is, in some cases, being on a very, very safe side. So in my opinion, we could speed up that way, but not losing the principle that the technology should fit into some conditions before it comes to the market. The principle is right, but the way in doing it is very European, very slow, very bureaucratic, and very, with tiny, tiny steps. And that makes it very difficult. And as we have heard already, 27 different regulations on a market, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really tough to check it.
Okay, thank you. And this also, I think, brings us to the question of the business model behind all of this. And again, there's a comment in the chat around the difference between a market push, technology push that you can see in particular in solutions like robo-taxi services, and on the other hand, the market pull function that you can see when talking more about, transit operating companies acquiring autonomous vehicles to serve a specific public transport type service. What do you think is actually driving the innovation and the technology in this area? What is driving the business models? Is it rather this technology push, or is there some market pull as well going on? John, what would you say?
I'm going to give a very boring answer. It's a bit of both. I mean, I don't have a more insightful or incisive answer than that. I mean, public transport operators see the potential for automated vehicles in addressing a number of challenges. In some areas, that's the driver shortage, which has already been mentioned here. For other use cases, it's about expanding the public transport offering. So where, on-demand services with a human driver in these kind of more peripheral areas was just not financially viable or sustainable at the moment, that becomes more interesting in an automated setup. And about then bringing more passengers into the kind of traditional or core mass transit network. And again, as I said before, for some others, they see massive efficiency gains just in automating some elements of depot operation or in automating, one or two high density lines. So there's much more of the kind of, I'd say, pull side in that sense, where the operators see, future potential. But again, it's, we're starting to see business models emerge, but we really need to see those validated and tested further, at least in Europe, in the kind of forthcoming, large scale pilot projects that we might see under European Commission funding. We'd really like to see some of the more realistic use cases really validated and sustainable services emerging from those.
And maybe Olav, if you can also comment on this market push, technology push versus market pull, and also whether you think shared vehicles in a way could be something in the middle, right? Somewhere in between the two, which can be in a way part also of public transport, but at the same time accommodating very much for individual mobility needs, right? Where do you see the business model for autonomous vehicles, Olav?
First, I will address that I think we should forget now this 6-month pilot project. 12-month pilot project. We must forget those. We must forget also the slow driving vehicles, because they do not deliver what the market asks for. So now there are vehicles. We know that there are vehicles on the market that can deliver high speed, that are type approved vehicles in electric vehicles in the bottom, that is factory developed for autonomous driving. So we know that is on the market now. So we must forget these years that we have behind us with these roasters. So then, about where is the business? The business in this is automation. So services that is ongoing 24/7, 7 days a week, is low hanging, I would say, and that is in airports where they have both small and larger vehicles. The crew should go on the small vehicle, the passengers go on larger vehicles, and we see the same in cities. On some of the services we can see smaller vehicles, like they now work with in Ruter in Grorud Valley, and they are nice to have in the network, because some people, they like to travel across the standard routes. So I think we'll see both in cities, airports, industrial areas, and so on. So I think now we are in the phase of the innovators, those that see that this is working and they're taking it. I think we should focus on those. There are some slow followers that will learn when I see and believe it works. So 24/7 services is mature, and those that are thinking about building now new tram lines, they should look into the total cost of ownership, tram line versus vice versa bus lines, because we know that the cost of building tram lines is very expensive. Could automated buses deliver for a cheaper price?
As you mentioned that, it brings up a thought in my mind. I mean, you're talking about a very specific sort of use case, connecting a city to an airport, for instance, right? That suddenly develops a very important function. And then I have a question on ownership, actually. I mean, the more these vehicles become independent, let's say, and driven, let's say, by technology that is owned by a technology provider, applied then to public transport, let's say, how does the ownership of that technology actually work? I mean, is it sort of, I put it into a vehicle and off you go, it's yours? Or am I still, in a way, owning the technology and to some extent owning the vehicle? Karl, how do the contractual aspects of such a scenario actually work out between the technology provider and the public authority?
Yeah, that's a very good and a very tricky question at the same time. From a technological point of view, you are developing a system that allows a vehicle to drive more or less autonomous. And from a technological point of view, it is relatively unimportant if that vehicle is a lawnmower or if it is built in a truck or in a taxi or in a private car. So this is a technology view. So what we really see is that it's like the question you had before, yeah, to own a car. Yeah, it's like you would ask me, Karl, does it make sense to own a CD? Okay, in a way, it makes sense to own a CD, but in the daily music business, we see this music as a service, which is delivered over my mobile or some other internet devices. So I'm really convinced that mobility will be transformed into a service, and that all the costs of the technology, the insurance part, the usage part, etc., will be included into a type of service fee for your mobility. So it might depend, for example, if the robotaxi that you order, do you want an individual robotaxi just for your own, that's premium class, or do you want a robotaxi which could be shared with 2 or 3 other people? Then it would be a shared robotaxi. It would be something like an eco class. These are the type of business models that will emerge. And so in my opinion, all the costs will be packed together in that in that service fee for mobility. And the question, does it make sense to own a car, will lose its
I think you cut a bit, Karl. I think there might be some couple of connection issues there. We'll try and get you back.
sorry.
We'll try and get you back in. Are you in?
Sorry. I have a bad connection. So my point is, all the costs and all the ownerships, the insurance, the fuel, the electricity price, the cleaning, all these type of costs, the total cost of ownership will be put into a service fee, and that's the overall business model. And then you can compare your mobility costs very easily, but it's a mixed tariff in it.
And maybe also a comment from John on this question of ownership. I mean, is it one of the, let's say, friction points in terms of adoption of this type of technology that a public transport authority may have to sort of somehow have a little bit less ownership of the vehicles because the technology is so important to the vehicle actually moving?
Well, I mean, I think for public transport operators and authorities, I think they will still expect to have some ownership over the vehicle because, again, it'll be deployed as part of a mixed fleet, and it will. I think what's kind of more important for them really is also the question of interoperability. I mean, we see operators who will, they already deploy vehicles from different providers of different size, of different functionality. And I can imagine that even in an automated world, or particularly in an automated world, that kind of expectation will remain. And so questions more about standardization and avoiding vendor lock-in are maybe even more predominant in their mind. And frankly, at the moment as well, there's a pure cost issue for the vehicles right now. That will come down as the technology matures and the cost savings that can be made elsewhere. But I think, as far as I would see it, if operators are going to expect to be deploying a vehicle for 8 to 10 years as the kind of current lifespan for buses, I think they'll expect to be able to do the same thing. But I think Olav maybe might be better to disagree with me here.
I think we will see different models there. I think the OEMs is not really prepared for taking new business models for the time being. We have seen in logistics that OEMs are prepared to charge for the full service, how many tons the vehicles is transporting on a daily basis. There can be OEMs here that are prepared to say that I sell you tomorrow electric vehicles. We are able to shift them out over to autonomous vehicles in 2 years when they are mature. Then they can replace these electric ones to another market. But so I think there will be different type of business models that the OEMs can support here. The challenge for the European OEMs is then that it's a big challenge for them now to handle the electric vehicles because of after sales and all these things. But this is an interesting topic. If the the operators want to buy them, or want to own them, because there is going to be a big shift now in the coming years, and those that are buying manual vehicles now, they will lose then maybe the opportunity to shift during this period to the autonomous version and save cost and deploy them. So I think interesting here to find good flexible business models for both parties.
I would like to then finish on a more sort of citizen-based question, because often in the mobility talk we always come back to the fact that ultimately urban mobility happens in public space. It often serves a public service mission, whether you think that should be carried out through individual private means of transportation or public, but ultimately there's a public service element to be able to move around freely in cities, right? And the question is, do you think public perception of autonomous vehicles can be a barrier, or on the contrary, do you think that in general there is strong support for autonomous vehicles where citizens are able to interact with them or to use them? They finally see that this is a great tool and fully support it. And potentially, if you can relate to a specific pilot example or a case study where you could say, well, yeah, in this specific case study, we saw how certain citizens reacted, or we experimented with citizens and got some feedback. That would be really interesting to understand that interaction. Maybe Karl first, if you can think of anything.
Yeah, thank you. I will give you an example from my own person. You know, when I got my first business car, which had an ADAS system, it was adaptive cruise control, I think, which was brand new at that time. The salesman said to me, listen, when the car automatically brakes at the end of a congestion or something like that, you will be very frightened if the car will really brake. So you will be very careful if it happens. And this reaction, this that you are very overcautious, this reaction will be for the first 10 times. After 10 times you've seen that the car will brake, you will completely relax because you learned that it works. And then he said the crucial point, he said, you know, both reactions are wrong. You shouldn't be overcautious in the very beginning, and you shouldn't be over trusting after you learned it. So this example for me is a very nice example because it tells you how people work and their perception. As we see from many, many studies, the people are very skeptical about the new technology, but you have to understand that people are always skeptical with regard to innovation, whatever it is, because up to a certain degree, it is an unknown territory for them. That's a very normal reaction. On the other side, when they had their first learning experience, they tried to be over-optimistic and enthusiastic. But in a free market, the consumer is always right. He is right, he or she is right in its...
But that's fine. I mean, Karl was cut when he said the consumer is always right. So that's quite a positive one. We'll go over to John. John, I'd like to ask you that question of public perception, really in terms of the public service mission, right? The public transport,
Sure.
Public service mission. Do you have any feedback on that?
I think it's important maybe to rating public perception in the abstract and public perception from people who have used the service. Because, yeah, as Karl was saying, if you ask people their opinion of disruptive technology when they've had no real experience and it's a hypothetical thing which they can't really imagine, then it's, you know, there's a limit to how kind of useful that feedback is. What we saw in the show project was that people who used the service were very positive about it. I mean, incredibly positive about it. So one very specific example is at the Frankfurt pilot site that we had. We were running smaller shuttles in a residential neighborhood linking a U-Bahn station in the north of the neighborhood to a commercial hub a couple of kilometers south. And it was an area that was underserved by public transport simply because the streets were too narrow to run full-sized commercial buses. In the middle of that neighborhood was a retirement community, obviously with a significantly older portion of the population. They were massive adopters of the automated vehicles. They loved it simply because it provided a reliable service that they did not have access to previously. I think this is the point. People are adaptive and adaptable. I take Karl's point that, you know, we can test something once and think it's fantastic and get carried away. That's certainly going to happen. But I think if we focus on using the technology to improve people's mobility experience, to give them new services, to make sure they're better connected, I think people will adapt to it and people will adopt it. And yeah, I'm quite that you still need to do public outreach. You still need to show people that it works, that it's safe. But I think once they experience that it does and they use it, then I think it becomes second nature. And eventually when we get to the point, you know, these larger buses, if you are sat in the back of a bus, are you going to see whether or not there's a driver in the driver's seat? is it going to be that important? I think it's going to be more important that there is a bus, that the bus arrives on time, that it drives safely, that it's comfortable, and you get to where you want to go to, because you've probably got 15 other more important things to be thinking about that morning.
Yeah, it remains a vehicle after all. But Olav, especially as you were also talking about the airports, right? I mean, when you arrive at the airport, you may have luggage, and sometimes the public transport service or a transport service in general with a human might be able to help you with your luggage, you know? So there might be a bit of public perception that would say, well, you know, this autonomous vehicle stuff, it's not amazing because you don't get that extra human service around certain types of transport. What do you think? How did the public react also in Stavanger? Do you have any feedback on that?
So, good question, thank you. We have so far on the airports never asked the person to help me with the luggage, but sometimes I think, am I on the right bus? And the driver do not know it. But if I had the push button, I know I could get some help from those that are experts on giving me help, that have the information that can tell me, yes, Olav, you are on the right bus. So I think with this remote control center that can help, they will have full service on it instead of driving and giving service that they're not permitted to do. So, and in Stavanger, I had an old lady in the bus this week, and I asked her, what about when we take out the safety driver from the vehicle, the driver there, and you can drive there? Oh, I'm not so happy with the driving technology, she said. And you're driving here now, I told her. Oh, yes, you're right. Why did you arrive on the bus now? Because I saw there were some people here. So if they see some other people there, they join it. It's like going on restaurants. When we see more people in the restaurant, we go to that restaurant. But the empty one, we think there's something wrong with the food. So, so I think that the show that this is a product that is usable, like Spotify and other things, and let people talk to each other, have good communication around it. We all very often include people in workshop before we implement new services, because then they start to communicate with each other on social media, and when they have communication in advance of a new service, they start to be eager to use the new service. So and that is also part of its marketing.
Yep, it's accompanying the product into the market. You know, if there is a market, and that can be facilitated by a regulatory framework, or indeed prevented by a regulatory framework. And Europe seems to be a little bit, somewhere in the middle, not quite choosing yet. Maybe just to finish off then, as a very last, 1 minute conclusion from each of you. Can you please just tell me in a minute, right? Just assume that I am a very, very critical, unimpressed regulator, right? That doesn't really want to push this autonomous vehicle technology into the market. Could you maybe just give me a 1 minute value proposition for autonomous vehicles that might get me thinking, right? A sort of a elevator pitch, maximum 1 minute on the key value proposition of autonomous vehicles for urban mobility. Who would like to have a go first? Can I go to maybe John?
Sure. Okay, so the key value proposition for autonomous vehicles in public transport is to grow the public transport network. So to bring more people into public transport using more types of services, offering increased coverage, both in hours of operation, in geographic scope, reducing car ownership and car usage, and maximizing the benefits of public transport that already exist. Cleaner air, better road safety, better economic development, better societal inclusion and accessibility. So automated technology is a multiplying effect for public transport, and you'd be foolish to miss out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John, for having been with us and for having shared your insights throughout this episode, and for the preparation as well on the presentation. Olav, over to you.
I'd like to follow up on John. So then when you have the service that John presented there, the passenger will always feel that the bus drive safe, park with the bus stop, so it's easy to get in and out without the long distance between the the bus stop and the bus, so it can easily go in and out, and they will always feel that the service is good, because the bus will always smile to them. So, and we know that there is lack of drivers, so why not start now? Come to Stavanger and try it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Olav. Thanks for the preparation, for sharing your insights. And yeah, you remind me that with Thomas the Tank Engine, we had an autonomous smiling vehicle already right there, you know, in the imagination. Karl, over to you.
Yes, so sorry again for my lousy Wi-Fi here at the hotel. I'm sorry really for that. I hope that the 60 seconds that I get, that it will consist. If you look to the literature and ask the people what they think about paradise, they say paradise is a little bit to sit on a flying carpet and to go there wherever I want, whenever I want, however I want, or to sit at home and get all the things delivered to you that you need so desperately, like medicine or food or a nice bottle of red wine that you want to consume at the evening. So the idea of a paradise could easily be realized with automated mobility solutions for good transportation as well as for person transport.
Okay, we go from Thomas the Tank Engine to paradise. So I think that's a great way to close this episode on autonomous mobility. Thank you so much to the three of you for having been with us, shared your presentation, your insights. It's been really fantastic. I could see lots of engagement in the chat. I tried to keep up and raised as many questions as I could, but I think that's really thanks to you for having, you know, opened people's minds. So thanks a lot for having been with us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Goodbye.
So we've had a pretty rich discussion. We went from, you know, the geopolitical tensions around the topic of autonomous vehicles, but always in the end linked to the technology embedded in these vehicles. We also touched upon the issue of trust in the vehicles, but we see at the end that there are use cases and people are reacting very positively to these use cases. We looked at the business models and what kind of business models might be driving innovation in this sector. And then obviously also the regulatory aspects which prevents or promotes autonomous vehicles. When we see the potential, we can probably be quite hopeful and say, yes, we should be investing here. On the other hand, are we investing in the uptake of technology, or are we investing directly in homegrown European solutions? That's still a little bit of a question unanswered for Europe. And as John posed that debate at the beginning, probably a much broader debate than just for mobility, right? It's our whole relationship to digital technology that is at stake here. I would like to finish with a little gift, if you like, to all of you. We have been doing several years of mobility talks now, and we've been building a bit of a community around the mobility talks. I would like to show you a couple of data points actually on our mobility talks. We're now today on episode 28, so that's been going on since 2020. In fact, we've had more than 3,600 registrations to the different episodes of the mobility talks, which means I think a community of more than 2,000, 2,500 actual individuals who have been signing up to these episodes. And when we look at the whole kind of list of you, you're representing 92 different countries. So after these many years of mobility talks, we thought, you know, with the EIT Urban Mobility team, what can we do to, you know, in a way reward you for being part of this community? So we thought we would give you the opportunity to actually tell us what topic you would like us to have in our next mobility talks. So what we're going to do, and I think Johan from EIT Urban Mobility will be putting the link in the chat. We are going to offer you that possibility through a little survey. It's literally 2 questions, right? There's a list of potential topics. You can pick the one that you think would be the most interesting. And maybe, you know, you can tell us a little bit more about why you think that might be interesting for us. And then we'll take that up. The topic that wins, we will be having it as our main topic for Mobility Talks number 30, which should happen just before the summer. So then as soon as we get that, we'll get working with the EIT Urban Mobility team to get the speakers and build that topic for you. Right? So that's a little gift to thank you for your loyalty and for regularly joining the mobility talks. And we hope that you'll have fun with that and that we'll be able to give you a great episode on the topic you want. Okay, so thanks again for joining. Thanks again for all your engagement. I was actually really struggling to keep up with all the comments in the chat, but I'm happy about that. It's the best way that we make these episodes, relevant to you, relevant to what you're working on. And so take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.